morning music นัทอานาศรีสุขสวัสดิ์ทรินเทียนธนู and Professor Dr. Yoshiro Miyata. Thank you very much. For Dr. Yoshiro, he just brought his instrument and Jen. They never practiced together before. See, sounds like the same band, right? Thank you very much. Good morning, everyone. I hope you have a very beautiful Sunday morning, and I'm glad to share my Sunday morning with you guys today for the last day of the conference. Before we start, we have some announcements. For proceeding, for all the others, you can check. This is the final check of your papers. There is a link for you to check your PDF file. It's going to be posted in the Facebook fan page of Fab Learn Asia 2020. This is the final call for your last checking. And if there is something you need to adjust, there is also another link in the same post to the form that you can give us information about adjustment. And please, this is the final check, and after this, all the proceeding will be finalized and proceed further. Okay. And if you haven't received the receipt for your registration to this conference, if you need that for your reimbursement at your institution, you can go to the registration desk this morning. Okay. And today we have a keynote speaker, our last keynote speaker, and student panel, and research poster, demo, educator posters. And the last session would be international panel. And I would like to invite everyone to stay until the end. The international panel, there are presentations from 5 different countries. And it would be interesting to see how 5 different countries in Asia apply and practice maker education. All right. I would like to hand over to Roger. Roger will give an introduction to our keynote speaker this morning. Thank you.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. I'm excited to introduce our keynote speaker today. We will be hearing from Dr. Paulo Blikstein, he's an associate professor at the Teachers College at Columbia University. He is one of the last students of Seymour Papert who has found his way from being a metallurgical engineer in Brazil to a prominent researcher in education. And is known around the world, from engineering metals to teaching Beyond Bits and Atoms course to future educators. Paulo is perhaps most well known for establishing the term Fab Learn, which emphasizes and reminds people that Fab Labs in schools are as much about learning as it is about making, a key point so many people forget. Fab Learn started as a small gathering at Stanford University, but now it is a global phenomenon with events all over the world. So many conferences are being held, I can't really keep track of. So I'm very excited to invite Dr. Paulo to give us today's keynote.
Thank you, Roger and Nalin, for the introduction. So let's just see if the projection works. Great. Yep. So today I would like to talk about this idea, where do we go from here? I think it's no news for you that maker education and constructionism are not like pilot ideas anymore. They are becoming mainstream ideas. And we are going through those kind of growing pains. So we are very good at doing pilot projects, doing projects in one school, 5 schools, but where do we go from here? Like, what do we do when we want to become a mainstream educational phenomenon and not just being in startup mode? And before I go into this, since Roger mentioned the FabLearn conferences and all of that, I want to say that, having been in too many conferences, not just FabLearn, but many other conferences around the world, I'm super impressed by how, the Thai team has put together this event. I was blown away by yesterday's cultural event and the temple market and everything, so I just want to invite a round of applause to the Thai organization team that has done amazing work. So let me start by saying a little bit about how education systems get built. So, we went through a few models over the last, couple thousand years. And normally they start with some societal needs. So people say, we need people to know certain things. Then those things get kind of codified into national standards. And now we have formalized national standards, but hundreds of years ago, there were no documents of national standards, but they were codified in the monasteries, in religion, and all kinds of things. But now we have, kind of state national standards. Then those national standards get transformed by publishers, by teachers, by cities, states into lesson plans and books and textbooks and things like that. Then some other people start doing professional development based on that and all of that, and then it gets into the classroom. So if you look at our current education system, how did we get there? What kind of societal needs got us where we are now? So let me show you, as you can see, by the font, it's an old book, and this is the first mathematics textbook in Europe. And you can see in the top the multiplication table, algorithms for multiplication down there, long division to the right. And so you might recognize this as stuff you had in your education, in your school growing up, or the kids that are here might say, oh, yeah, I had this in 3rd grade, 4th grade. So, but this is from 1478. This textbook, this first textbook was published in Italy near Venice in 1478. And it's amazing to me, actually Columbia University's libraries, they used to have a copy of this book, but it's the exact thing we learn in math to this day. But this was not a random thing. As I said, this is about societal needs. So if you go a few pages more into this book, they talk about 5 things that people need to know in this merchant town of Treviso near Venice. There was a lot of commerce going on. So what people need to know. So first they said, I wish to show you, this is the author talking to the readers, certain problems in the rule of 3. So rule of 3 was a big thing because it's about calculating proportion, price. So for example, if you want to sell half, like a bag of rice or half a kilo of gold, whatever, you have to do rule of 3 to calculate the equivalent in money or in other kind of merchandise that you want to exchange. So rule of 3 was huge in 1478. Discount was also huge, so percentage, right? So, I'll give you 10% discount if you buy 2 bags of whatever. I guess in Italy it was pasta, not rice, or basil leaves or something. Just to stereotype a little bit, since we don't have any Italians here, we can stereotype their food a little bit. So problems in partnership. So if I have a partner in my business and I invest 60% of the money, the other person invests 40%, what do we do about the profits, et cetera, et cetera. And, you know, alloys of coins, because coins were like made, you know, kind of by each city and each state. There were no like national currency necessarily and all of that. So, I mean, just think about how much of this is still in our curriculum, and we are still spending years teaching kids about percentage and, you know, partnerships and discount and rule of three and all of that. But this was real for them. This was actually very useful. So I can imagine the kids or the people in that school in 1478 super excited getting to school. Oh, finally, we're going to learn about percentage. You know, I've been dreaming of percentage for like years. Finally, I'm going to learn about it. Because it was relevant to them. It was important to them. And then the kinds of problems that this textbook has, to me, is just amazing. Like, they have problems that we still find in textbooks almost word by word. Like, a carpenter has undertaken to build a house in 20 days. He takes another man and says, if we build the house together, we can accomplish the work in 8 days. Required to know how long it would take this other man to build it alone. I mean, if you look at, you know, the SATs in the US, or like any kind of national, you might find almost word by word questions like this. And this was formulated, and this book has like a ton of questions like this, these kind of word problems. But then again, this, you know, I can imagine that in 1478, people were actually interested in knowing how much time it takes. Now, we're not that interested in those kinds of word problems because everything has changed. Anyway, so just to tell you that a lot of what we have now is not random. It came from societal needs that were real 500 years ago, but now are not real anymore. I mean, some of them, of course, you know, you want to know some rule of three, some percentage, but how much time are we investing in 1478 content, and how much time should we invest in, you know, 2020 content? Because, as you know, as educators, education is all about choices. Time is the most precious thing in classrooms, and if you spend time doing, you know, discount hair, you don't have time to do the other stuff. There is no infinitely expandable time in classrooms. So it's an opportunity cost problem. So let's move a little bit to a different kind of vision. Since we are in Thailand, the land of constructionism, what was the constructionist vision that wanted to transform a lot of this content and a lot of these ways of teaching? So one important thing to consider when we talk about the constructionist vision is that constructionism is not about computers, it's not about logo, it's not about you know, hands-on learning and all of that. Construction is about an idea that cognition happens with external media, within a culture, and with others. So the brain is never working in isolation. And this is the kind of mental model we have of the human brain. Is the brain is isolated, it's like in a box, and I will feed information into the brain and make it stay there. And it's sort of a container, and Paulo Freire talks about, it's like the banking view of education. It's sort of a bank account, and you deposit stuff there, and it stays there until you want to take it out. But we know from cognitive science and from 100 years of research that that's not how the brain works. The brain is connected to context, to culture. We are connected to others. And everything we do is with the aid of external objects, external cognitive aids. So imagine the amazing leap that humanity went through when you had to memorize everything because there was no written language. So there was a limit to the ideas people could have when there was no written language. Because your brain was so occupied memorizing things, and there's a limit to how much you can memorize. So there were some ideas that you could never have without written language, right? Without written stuff. So, for example, you cannot keep 100 or 1,000 data points of the temperature in your farm, for example, if you don't write it down, right? So the idea of trends, of things going up and down, of time series, of patterns in nature, it's very hard to have those ideas if you don't have a place to write things down. So when we found out, oh, we can write things down, we can create a language and all of that, it's not just that we kept doing the same things but now on paper. There were ideas we could not have before that now we could have with the written, media and all of that. So we're always performing cognition in partnership with objects, with technologies, like the pencil is a technology, the papyrus is a technology and all of that. And those technologies allow us to have new ideas. And that's how, we built the world. We built amazing new things because we keep not only creating technologies, but creating technologies to help us have ideas. But it's also about other people, and this is from, you might know Lev Vygotsky, the idea that we're learning socially. We are never learning alone. We're learning from other people that know more than us, and in this kind of social environments where we ask people for help, people help us get things done and all of that. That's the real learning. That's how we actually learn outside of, constricted school environments. So this is part of the constructionist vision. And an important part of that is that Seymour Papert said, well, now we have this new technology, computers and digital media and all of that, and maybe that will give us the same kind of expansion of cognition, expansion of intellectual potential that we had when we found out how to read and write stuff. So now you don't have to have 100 data points or 100 things on a piece of paper. You can have 100,000 or 1,000,000. Now you can communicate ideas that you couldn't communicate before. Now you can simulate things on a computer and play what-if scenarios. So if you're trying to understand how molecules work, you don't have to draw them on paper and imagine in your mind them moving. You can make them move and create 100 different scenarios of how chemical reactions happen and observe and see which one makes more sense and all of that. So it's an incredible expansion of human cognition. And we wonder how come in 10 years we invented a lot of like phones and satellites and all of that. It's because now we have these cognitive partners, computers and algorithms and all of that, they allow us to have ideas faster and to develop things faster and all of that. And that was exactly what Seymour Papert wanted for kids, that kids should not be insulated from these innovations, from these cognitive partners. They should be embedded deeply into schools, because the same power that scientists have and the same things that they can invent, kids should also be able to invent in schools, and we should not wait until they're 18 to get started. So the vision of constructionism was that, with others, within a culture, respecting a culture, and with these new cognitive partners, we can leapfrog our education systems. But there was another side of constructionism that's very important, and Professor Debbie Fields and I are doing now interviews all over Thailand with people that were involved in the constructionist projects in Thailand, which is one of the most interesting and complex implementations in the world. And one of the documents we found between the Thai team and the MIT Seymour Papert team, Seymour Papert wrote this. He said, "I'm suspicious of experts who tell countries they have scarcely seen how to conduct their business or their affairs." And Seymour goes on and on in this document that he wrote to the leadership of the foundation, talking about how he doesn't want to tell Thailand what to do. He wants to start a conversation, a partnership, and he wants Thai people to come up with their own ideas, their own interpretations of constructionism, and their own implementation. And that's, I think, a departure from a lot of technological ed tech implementations all around the world, that they say, oh, we come from the US, we're really smart people, and here is our formula. We have a software, buy this software, put into your schools, and you'll be done, because this is modern, it's from the Silicon Valley and all of that. So that's not at all what Seymour did. Seymour said, I'm suspicious of myself, because I don't know Thailand enough, and I don't want to, tell you what to do. And also, another piece of the same document, he says, we don't want any computing culture in Thailand. We don't want the US computing culture. We want a Thai computing culture in Thailand. And that's, if you remember yesterday's panel, that's exactly what happened. You know, there was an MIT team that came to Thailand and spent, you know, some time here. There were many workshops. There were many conversations. You know, Roger was from here and went there to study and come back and all of that. But essentially, what we're finding out in this research that we're doing is that the constructionism in Thailand was a radical reinterpretation of the original ideas of Seymour Papert and deeply embedded in the Thai culture and completely different from constructionism in Brazil, for example, or in the US or in other countries. And I think that's a very powerful thing because it sends a powerful message about how do we want to change schools. Is not by importing formulas from other countries. It's not by bringing boxed products or boxed software from Silicon Valley geniuses, but it's through this painful and laborious process of bringing in new ideas and let them integrate with the culture and get people in, and that takes years. In case of Thailand, it started in 1996 and still going on. And so now, moving a little bit more to our theme of maker education, I want to show you the three main goals of this project that used to be called Project Lighthouse here in Thailand. And I want you to appreciate how similar those goals are from what maker education came to be. So the first one is, Seymour Papert wrote, the goal is giving students greater control over the learning process with the result that they learn to take charge of their own learning. Making the learning of all subjects more personal and more meaningful to the learner with the result that learning is better motivated and far more effective. Extending the content of what is learned to include the study of computer and other technologies. So, I mean, that's, to me, so strikingly similar to what a lot of maker education is. And that's why sometimes myself and other people, we like to call Seymour the father of maker education, because he was having these ideas in 1996. And, you know, those ideas percolated and kind of contaminated in a very good way the maker movement. So, you know, keep in mind those goals, and I'll come back to some of them towards the end of the talk. The third thing about this project and maker education that I want to talk about is that another important agenda of constructionism, which is also in the agenda of maker education, is that new technologies can help children learn unimaginable things. So, computer programming 50 years ago, when Logo was invented, the first programming language, it was crazy to think that kids would ever program a computer. You know, computers would occupy like a floor this size, and you need to go to like 2 years of training just to kind of get in the room, and programming the machines was extremely hard and all of that. So what Seymour said is, and you know, when I say Seymour, it's not just him, but it's his whole team of people like Edith Ackerman and others that were there at the time. So the idea is that, you know, new technologies can help children learn unimaginable things. But Seymour said a sentence that was very interesting. He said, the point of the computer in education is not for the computer to teach the kids. It's for the kids to teach the computers. So the idea is that, you know, technologies are not helping education by teaching as teaching machines, but by constructing, so by being raw material that kids will use to build things. And that was also a radical idea at the time. Imagine 50 years ago, and you know, it's sort of saying kids will program satellites to go in orbit. It was a crazy idea, but it inverted completely the idea, the paradigm that people had for education technologies then, which was, yeah, computers will replace teachers, TVs will replace teachers. Teachers are expensive, you know, they are like troublemakers, we don't like teachers, so we'll create machines that will replace teachers. But Simmer said, no, we don't want to replace teachers. We want to use technology in this other way. So today you can think that technology will help children learn things like genomics, biochemistry, bioengineering, AI, machine learning, space science. And you know, if I shown this slide 5 years ago, you might think, oh, that's a bit too crazy. But at this conference, we have kids using machine learning, you know, in their projects. Like they use voice recognition, which uses machine learning. And when you talk to them, they understand, yeah, this uses like, you know, the Google APIs for voice recognition. So they understand what they're doing. And, you know, at the SIL, there were kids who sent a CubeSat into space. You know, you talk to the kids, they are talking about things like, you know, biochemistry, bio-inspired robotics, and all kinds of things. And I mean, because you're like immersed in this world, I want to give you an appreciation of how amazing it is that in just 10 years, we went from teaching arithmetic to teaching machine learning to 10-year-olds, and how revolutionary that idea is. Not because they are learning machine, but the way they are learning machine learning or AI is not that you're teaching them, is that they are building things that use those technologies and then being, you know, deeply immersed in those kinds of things. So before we go to this, my second point, let's come back a little bit to societal needs and that thing that I showed before. So now we know today that our societal needs are different. We know, for example, in the US economy, in the last 50 years, all the tasks that can be, you know, routine tasks have been automated. So, you know, you go to the airport, you know, machines are doing the check-in. They're doing, you know, a lot of the work. We have self-driving cars. You have all kinds of things. Even lawyers are being automated. So a lot of the stuff that can be automated is being automated. And then everything that's inherently human, unscripted communication, solving unstructured problems, and all of that. And there's a ton of, you know, stuff. It's not that we don't have enough complex problems to solve. We do have lots of problems to solve, but we know that the societal needs are changing because we're automating a lot of things that used to be routine. So what does that mean to this thing? So, and if the societal needs are changing, we also need to change this whole thing. But this is a task for, you know, 20, 30 years. And I don't know if you realize, but you are part of this revolutionary restructuring because you are providing the examples that this is actually possible. So what we need now is not, you know, national standards that are stable for 20, 30 years. We need national standards that are evolving. So we need governments to say, okay, we're going to write national standards that will be revised every 3 years because things are moving so fast. We can't have kids learning, you know, in 2040, the content that we thought in 2020, they, you know, would be important. So the way to write national standards has to change. Instead of lesson plans and books and textbooks that also last forever and are like stable and never change, we need more like kits, spaces, you know, new kinds of learning spaces, activities, guidelines for facilitation, all of that. So a much more flexible kind of system that can accommodate this fast change that's going to happen in knowledge and national standards and all of that. So we should move towards education systems that are not like this stale documents that are boring and never change and bureaucrats are like writing. We should move to systems that are much more dynamic. And if you are part of, for example, an independent school, you know, in Thailand or in some other place, you know that you already operate like that. So private schools, independent schools, they already operate like that. They don't like just buy textbooks and use the same textbooks for 15 years. They are, and I work with, you know, some of those people, they have kits, they have spaces that are constantly being reconfigured. They have activities instead of, textbooks this size that are constantly being rewritten and everything. And then, of course, the teacher preparation, the professional development also has to change. So that entire blue system is something we have to build. And some countries are, being smart and realizing, yeah, we have to build that because we cannot operate here anymore because our societal needs changed. And I added a word there that I will talk about in a little bit, the word ethos, that I think is very important too. So just keep that in mind. In the US, we have something called the Next Generation Science Standards that are trying to do this. In Canada, in the state of British Columbia, they also have a new curricular framework. In Finland. And for example, in Canada, we have a completely new class, a new course that's mandatory for all kids called Applied Design Skills and Technologies. Of course, it's not yet changing in the entire system, but it's creating, a piece of that blue construction. So this is sort of a big picture of what I think is our mission as constructionists, maker educators, and all of that. It's not to stop at the makerspace, but it's to understand that the blue thing is the big challenge that we have to engage with. And the sooner we do it, the sooner we'll get our kids to be in that blue space. And another thing that is important, and when I talk to maker educators and they say, oh, but I don't like talking to government people, they're so old-fashioned and boring. They don't understand anything. I don't like writing standards but there's no one else to help build that blue structure. It's us. And if we don't do it, it will just stay like this. So we have to engage with policymakers. We have to explain to them that you cannot expect 21st century skills if you're still operating under this structure, because the world is different. So let's take a little bit of stock and think about where we are with maker education. So just to give you some kind of good news, I think. First of all, when I built the first Fab Lab in a school in Russia in 2010, a lot of people were like, why build a space? Like, schools they don't have space. You never get more than one of those labs built in a school because it's expensive, there's no space. If they have space, they're going to do something else. And my theory back then was that, a lot of innovation in schools, it kind of comes and goes, it goes away because we don't have a space to anchor the innovation in school. So, you do a robotics, but if you don't have a robotics space, eventually someone gets rid of robotics because, you can't store it. It doesn't build a culture around robotics. So my theory was that if we build these spaces that back then, we used to call Fab Labs at school or whatever, if we build spaces, then you build a culture around the space. Then you have a person taking care of that space. Then you have all this sunken cost into the space, and it's a lot harder to get rid of it. And fortunately, that idea turned out to be right. So now we have thousands of maker spaces, and all around the world, and that's like a once in a generation event. I mean, what was the last time that schools kind of came up with a new type of? It was like the science lab in the 50s or the gym in the 20s. So this is amazing that now schools have a new space that's not for the traditional stuff. It's for a completely new kind of practice. And when I was doing my master's thesis at MIT, Roger was my office mate. I had, one of Seymour Papert was in my committee, so I talked to him about when I was about to defend. I showed him the work that I've done in Brazil with kind of project-based learning and robotics in the slums of São Paulo. And he told me something that it took me years to understand the kind of, with Seymour, it's like every time he would talk to you 10 minutes and then you take 2 years to process what he did. So one of the things he said was that, you know, you're doing this work in this space, and you're disrupting the geography of the space. Because normally in this classroom, even in a computer lab, you have this geography, like the tables are fixed to the floor and everybody is doing the same. And, there was a teacher at the front. And then when I showed him the pictures of this space, it's like, this space that you're showing me, there is no front. There is no space to teach. This is a place where it's impossible to teach. Because kids were like moving around and running around with their kits and their projects and all of that. And he said, this new geography of a learning space, this is highly disruptive to the traditional paradigm that we have. And you know, it took me a while to understand what he meant, but now I understand that that's exactly what happens in a makerspace. A makerspace, I like to think of it as a space where it's impossible to teach. I mean, try to teach fractions in a makerspace. It's impossible. Kids are like doing all kinds of stuff. They have materials. They will get up and get some material and try to experiment with that. So I think that's a really important thing, that this is no ordinary space. The second thing that I think we achieved in the last 10 years is that we create a whole new profession, the maker teacher. I mean, there are schools that now they hire, you know, they put ads to hire maker teachers or like Fab Lab teachers or whatever the name is. It's a new teaching profession. That's also once in a generation. You know, the last time this happened was maybe, you know, 50 years ago. We are changing national curricula. That's also another like amazing thing. As I showed you examples in Canada, in the US and all of that. So those are great things, and we should, you know, because we're part of it, sometimes we don't realize how important those things are. I mean, this is no ordinary thing. I mean, I've been in this field for, you know, almost 2 decades, and I hear people saying all the time, schools never change, it's impossible, whatever. I mean, this is real change. I mean, if it's not in every school, of course, but this is the most significant change I've seen in the last 20 years. But it's not all good news, because it's not just about making, and that's what Roger said in the introduction. It has to be about learning, because, you know, I can cook for myself, and I can make food, but it's terrible food. I mean, I do it almost automatically. You know, I do things. In the last 10 years, I've cooked for myself. I haven't learned a thing. I just do it like in the minimal way, just to get food in my mouth. I've done, you know, like rice or fish, whatever, like hundreds of times, and I haven't learned a single thing about the principles of cooking, like how to generate a certain flavor, how to, you know, cook in a certain way to make the fish softer or whatever. So it's possible to do things. Now I guess you never accept a dinner invitation to come to my house anymore, but we can order out. So it's possible to make without learning, right? And you might have lots of examples of that. So that's a really important part. It's easy to be impressed with projects that kids do, but we have to keep thinking, this community here, what are they learning? It's very easy to be seduced by cuteness, and I have to say, in this conference we had a lot of cuteness, but a lot of learning, because, you know, we went around asking the kids and all of that. So, but it's very easy to be seduced by cuteness, because, you know, you go to a makerspace and kids say, look, I made a light blink. And I say, yeah, well, that's cute, that's really nice, but what have you learned? I say, I don't know, I mean, I just did it. And then you go the next week and you say, oh, I made now a green light blink. And say, yeah, but what have you learned? I don't know, I just think it's cool. So it's very easy to be seduced by cuteness or by fancy projects and all of that. So now I want to bring, I don't know if they are here, but 2 of the stars of the conference, and there are others that I'll mention later, but when I was talking to the kids that made, you know, the vacuum cleaner and the air filter, I mean, think about all this stuff they were talking about, like air pressure. So I remember when this project was being described, they said, there's lower air pressure outside, higher air pressure inside, so that creates a flux of air and all of that. There's a ton of electronics there that you have to really learn. So this is not like just a light blinking, right? This is a real science and engineering project. And the vacuum cleaner, we also talked to, I forgot his name. Is he? Are they here? Yeah, good. So I say, okay, how is the vacuum created? And so we talked about the fans, and then there was a filter, and then he was showing me how when he takes one bottle out and puts his hand on the pipe, it still sucks the stuff, but a little bit less because there's less power. How the seals needs to be the seals need to be very well done, because otherwise there is a loss of vacuum. The wireless communication between the controller and the board and all of that. So there is a lot of learning that happened here. Like, you cannot do those projects if you don't learn about airflow, about air dynamics, about air filtration and all of that. And I'll mention some of the other projects as well in a bit. So this is the kind of question we need to be asking when we see maker projects. Is like, what are you learning? Like, what scientific engineering principles or artistic principles? Because also there is a lot of learning in art. When you're painting, there are lots of techniques, there are lots of ideas and all of that. And we have to keep pushing on this issue of learning, because there are just too many maker spaces I go to where when I ask people, what are kids learning? People don't have an answer. They're like, I don't know, they're doing stuff. And I've shown many times this project, this research project that my student, former student Bertrand Schneider and Richard Davis did, where they were looking at learning and making, and realizing that a lot of times if kids never stop, if you don't see them stopping doing a maker activity, and so, I mean, the idea is that kids that never stop doing hands-on stuff during a maker activity, they learn less than kids that stop and pause and reflect. So they were showing empirically how important it is to reflect on what you're doing and understand the principles behind, airflow, or behind vacuum generation and all of that. So we need to create activities and things and spaces and curricula that are not only for making, but also for learning. So, and that brings me to one of my last points here, which is today, learning arithmetic is really no big deal. Like, you can do it on your phone, you can Google things and all of that. So today, everything worth learning is complex. So what's worth spending time in schools is not anymore the boring, simple stuff that people can Google. It's the complicated stuff, the complex stuff. So for example, think about climate change. So, a simple answer to climate change is like, well, let's stop eating meat, for example, which I think is probably something we should do. But what about the people that work in the meat industry? How are we going to give them jobs? What about, for example, Brazil, which is a big producer of meat? Are we collapsing the Brazilian economy? So that's a really complex problem. So if we want to reduce the consumption of meat, we might need to create programs to support countries that survive on meat, on meat production. We might have to give jobs, other jobs, and retrain people that work on these industries. Also, if we stop using cars, how are people going to get to work? We need to build public transportation, but maybe some countries don't have money to build public transportation, so we also need to. So, I mean, all the problems we have that are important are complex. We are done with the simple stuff. Humanity has solved most of the simple problems. Now all the problems are complicated, multifaceted, hard to solve and all of that, and that's the kind of stuff we need to teach kids in schools, how to solve complicated problems. So sometimes when I go to a makerspace and I see the portfolio of projects and people tell me, yeah, well, we have great projects here, but we simplify them to make them really, really easy so that kids don't get frustrated. So we have the blinking light, we have the green blinking light and the yellow blinking light and the kind of, postcard project, whatever. And that's all they do because they said, kids get frustrated. We can't have them do complicated things because then they ask for help and it's hard, they get frustrated. So when engineering is not complex anymore, it's not worth learning. I mean, what's the point of having a makerspace where kids are making lights blink all the time? That's all they do. So we need to resist this urge to simplify and trivialize things because it's too hard otherwise. So makerspaces need to be places where it's as Seymour Papert said, it's hard fun. It's a place to do hard stuff, to think hard, to build complicated things. And yeah, it's hard to help kids do that, but we need to, that's the stuff we need to do, otherwise it's not worth doing anymore. So I want to end talking a little bit about a second, one additional point about maker education, which is I also go and talk to people all around the world and I say, what are the goals of your makerspace or your maker program or your constructionist program? And people say, I have 20 goals: increase attendance, reduce disciplinary issues, generate entrepreneurship, bring forth cultural identity, support gender equity, develop design sensibilities, foster creativity, and all of that. And I said, and how many people you have to help you with those, and say, oh, it's just me. I said, I mean, this is insane. To do one of those things, you need a team of 3 people. If you're doing it alone, you're not going to do it well. So the point is that another danger that we have in this community is that we might be trying to do too much at the same time without the resources. So my advice, often to those people is like, pick 1 or 2 things that you want to do in your makerspace or your maker program and do it really well. And then tell your principal or your minister of education, it's like, if you want all 7 things, I need resources, I need more people, I need more money, more spaces and all of that. Because otherwise, it's a recipe for frustration and for failure. If we take on too many things, and it's not anyone's fault, it's just that it's so easy to accumulate lots of goals because people, ministers of education are saying, oh, our country is, we are a knowledge economy. We want to be, name of the country 4.0 or 5.0 or 10.0, whatever. But often policymakers don't understand what it takes to actually get those things done, right? So it's often the case that maker teachers or maker coordinators, they take on too much and they can't do it, not because they're not good or competent, but just too much, it's too much work for one person or one space for 20 people, right? So being realistic about goals and picking a couple of things that you can do well is really important. And it's really important for the sustainability of this movement too. And finally, I want to talk about, again, inspired by something that Seymour Papert said a while ago. He said, why there are conferences on technology in education? And he said, we do a disservice to our own community to say we're not a conference on education, we're a conference on technology in education. So I think more and more we have to think of what happens in a makerspace, what happens in constructionist learning, not as a special case of learning. So say, oh, we are the maker educators. But you doing the traditional stuff, you're the educators. We should say, no, what we do is actually not maker education, is education. It's the best version of education. And you are the people, you do traditional education or boring education. I mean, you can come up with different names. But we should think of ourselves as educators that are doing mainstream, the best version of education that we have. And building all of this. So now I just want to, as promised, comment on this idea of ethos that I put there, especially when we're building these new blue structures. So what is the ethos of the world we live in? So ethos is the kind of spirit of the times, right? What is motivating people? What is the spirit of our times? So you might know about this guy. There's a 17-year-old Dutch youth who came up with the Ocean Cleanup Project, which is like a huge structure that is taking plastic out of the ocean, like tons and tons of plastic. So he came up with this idea when he was 17, and he got funding from different agencies, and now he's like actively removing trash from the oceans with huge kind of sieves and structures. This is the Parkland survivors. So those are kids in the US that survived a shooting, a massacre in a school. And they said, we don't want adults taking care of this anymore. We want to take charge of our own movement against gun violence. And they started their own movement. And they are like 16, 15, 17, and they are on the cover of the Time magazine. And of course, you might know Greta Thunberg, who is 16 years old and a big name in climate change and all of that. So this is the spirit of our times. Young people, they are taking charge of things. They are fed up with us adults taking too long to solve problems. And they say, I'm not going to let you take care of climate change because you failed. You have been failing for 50 years. I want to live to 80. So they are taking charge of things. And when we talk about empowering kids, we often forget that empowering means giving power. So if we talk about empowering kids and we say, well, but I want my assessment in place, and I want my testing, and I want to put you in a box and control you and tell you what you're going to learn and all of that, that's not empowering. Empowering is sharing power, and sharing power is not like easy, or it's not something that you can do by keeping all the controls and keeping everyone under control. Empowering means giving up control. And we need to also think about this idea that if we want kids to be empowered, we need to stop thinking of them as like infantilized beings that need to be controlled and assessed and measured and kind of put through a system and all of that. And we have examples here of those kinds of personalities. So our 4 heroes, and there are more heroes that we'll present later today, but I'm just showing those because I had this wonderful picture. So, I mean, if you talk to the kids, not only these ones, don't want to single out any kid in particular, but talk to them, talk to the other kids, you feel, and I talked to many kids during the demo session, you get an amazing sense of we are taking charge of things. We are solving problems. So I saw a problem like there was a shrimp farm feeder, there was a wheelchair project, there were projects to help the people with disabilities and all of that. But those are not like toy projects. They're not doing like, I made a poster with a happy sun and I hope things get better. They're actually designing the solutions with high technologies. So, young people, they are not willing to wait another 20 years to have an impact. This is the spirit of our times, is that young people are taking charge. And there is nothing more unfair that some people being able to follow their passions and ideas and do those projects while others cannot afford the risk. I mean, we have some kids here that were lucky to be in this situation that they can show their projects. But imagine how many kids out there can do the same if they have the spaces, the infrastructure, the support, and all of that. So the possibility of democratizing the possibility of falling in love with projects, making a difference, that is the fundamental thing we as adults should do. We should democratize this amazing possibility for kids to fall in love with ideas, to make a difference and all of that. So it's not just a few kids that can do it, but all kids. And I think that if we are living in a time where schools do not serve that purpose of getting kids to take charge of their reality and to do things and all of that. Schools have no purpose anymore because you can Google things. And with that, I want to thank the organization team and thank you all for listening and hoping to keep the conversation going. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor Paulo Blikstein. Now, I would like to invite Ajahn Yupin Trangkhathan, Vice Provost of Darun Sikhalai School for Innovative Learning, to present the token of our appreciation. เชิญบนเวทีเลยค่ะอาจารย์ On stage, please. Thank you very much. Okay, so after this we will take a 30 minutes break. But before that, I would like to inform that all the we record like the session in with short video clips, and they all will be available on the website within 2 weeks after the conference, so wait a little bit. And also please stay in touch on the FabLearn 2020 on fan page. We'll keep like posting the like pictures, and all the graphical notes will be there. It's very interesting to have that very beautiful and kind of like very interesting way to, you know, like record everything in the art, and you know, I really like that. Check it out. And I would like to ask educator submission number 63 and research poster number 44. Please come and meet us in the front during the coffee break. All right, and we'll have half an hour for a short break, and we'll come back at 10:30 for the student panel. Thank you.